Let me introduce our next speaker, Bob Chandra. Bob is a dear friend of mine I've known for many, many years. He's worked at Amazon, at Walmart, at Twitter as product marketing, and he is here talking about the weapons that are available for civilians to purchase and to use. So Bob, would you kindly come here and share your presentation?
All right, well, you just heard a great presentation from Brett about how civilians in different countries face risk from drones. And I heard it once before at the last forum, but I think it was even scarier this time around. So there's that. And then after me comes a speaker talking about a campaign to stop killer robots. So along the same upbeat, feel-good theme as all these talks, I'm going to talk about how military weapons come into the hands of civilians. Before I jump into this topic, because it can be pretty dark, I'm going to keep it light. I'm going to talk about a few weapons that you won't believe you can buy and own. So this is a muzzle-loaded cannon. We've used it as far back as the 14th century. And you can actually buy this cannon, and if you're fortunate enough to own a front lawn in the Bay Area, you can park it right in your lawn, and it's legal. And actually, muzzle-loaded, what that means is you put the ammunition in the front. And for some reason, that exempts this weapon from firearms laws. So there's actually very few regulations at all. Here's a weapon you might have seen in video games or movies. They're legal in some states, not legal in others. But they are legal in California. All you need is a permit from the state fire marshal. There's a separate permit just for flamethrowers. So you can buy it, do whatever you want with it. It's legal. So the reason I'm talking about these weapons, realistically, no one would use either of these weapons. They confer no advantage compared to firearms. If you woke up at 3 in the morning and you wanted to defend yourself or your family, you'd use a handgun. You certainly wouldn't pick up the flamethrower or get the cannon ready. But this is by way of showing that these weapons slip through the cracks. And somehow, ordinary people get to use them. But this conference is about high technology. How does high technology actually create weapons that do confer advantages versus traditional firearms? Imagine a weapon that could be used from miles away, that you could not see coming, that was totally invisible. This weapon could cause immense pain. It would feel like torture. The victim could not see the weapon, and there's no room for any witnesses, because no one else could see it either. It leaves no marks. It leaves no evidence whatsoever. If you were to be hit by this weapon, you wouldn't know what was happening, you wouldn't know who was hitting you, or how they were doing it, or where they were. Unfortunately, these weapons do in fact exist, and they've made their way from the military battlefield to the general population. These weapons are called EMF, or electromagnetic frequency weapons. They're sometimes also called pain weapons or frequency weapons. Here you see an example of an EMF weapon. It's called the active denial system. It was built by the US military as an anti-personnel device to prevent entry into certain protected areas. It was also called crowd control. The way this weapon works is it fires a 95 gigahertz EMF beam. You cannot see it. And you can see in the picture, it's striking at a target. That target, what happens is the beam heats the top 1/64th of an inch of his skin and heats the water molecules in the skin to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. So it feels like you're burning. But again, there's no burn marks. And that's the beauty of the system to the military, is they can take these aggressive actions, but those that are hit by it are left without complaint, or at least a complaint that would be believed. I should mention this weapon works from 800 feet away. That's over 2 football fields. So you can imagine if it were to be used domestically in a city environment, a suburban environment, since it operates through walls, it's likely the target would not even know where it was coming from. So we have the defense contractor Raytheon to thank for taking this military weapon and making a version of it that they sell to the American public. There are very few restrictions for this weapon, and there are no laws against it. It's called Silent Guardian, and it's been sold to the public for the last 10 years. Any of you here in the audience can buy Silent Guardian. There's nothing stopping you. All you need is the funds. Any organization, any corporation, your neighbor, if he wanted to, could purchase this weapon. We all here live in Silicon Valley. We know that technology moves faster than the law, but this weapon has been on the market now for over 10 years, and seemingly no one has done anything, certainly not Washington. Like every good product, Silent Guardian has a product brochure, and the Independent Media Center somehow got a copy of it. I'm not sure how they did, but they uploaded it, and here's part of it. The brochure shows someone using Silent Guardian almost like a video game. There's a monitor and a joystick, and it says, easy to use joystick control with auto-tracking capabilities. What auto-tracking means is that once you have the target or the victim in mind in your gun sights, he can run, he can scramble, he can duck, he can run behind a wall. You'll still be able to engage the target with the weapon. You'll still be able to fire that dangerous EMF beam and hit him or her with it. The UK Daily Mail had done a write-up on Silent Guardian, and the journalist offered himself as a guinea pig, put himself in front of the weapon. And here's what he had to say. I pulled my hand away sharpish. My finger is throbbing, but seems undamaged. I try it again. It is a bit like touching a red-hot wire, but there is no heat, only the sensation of heat. There is no burn mark, there's no blister. I am told not to call it a ray gun, though that is precisely what it is. The term pain gun is maybe better. But it is a horrible device nonetheless, and you are forced to wonder what the world has come to when human ingenuity is pressed into service to make a thing like this. Dr. John Wood is an expert in the way the brain perceives pain, and he said about this weapon, they are so obviously useful as torture instruments. It is ethically dubious to say they are useful for crowd control when they will obviously be used by unscrupulous people for torture. And we see the risk of this technology, and since people have made these observations, it's now in the hands of anyone who can afford it. And there is no moral code about how to use it. The weapon is not registered at all. So let me take a second and talk a little bit about the physics of this weapon. I won't go into gory detail. Let's think back to high school. They talked with us about the electromagnetic spectrum. It goes from high to low. At the low end, we have radio waves. They're very long, large waves, and they function over long distances. But the power is weak. And then on the other end, you see X-rays. X-rays are very powerful. Every time you go to the dentist, you have to wear a lead apron. Otherwise, you're at risk for cancer. So obviously, this frequency is doing something to your body. It's short, quick pulses as far as the wavelength. The weapons that we're talking about today are somewhere in between. They're in the microwave range of frequency, essentially 0.3 to 300 gigahertz. This is basically the sweet spot because it has the distance that radio frequency has, or in that neighborhood. It can function through walls, through buildings, and is powerful enough that it can cause pain and damage to the tissue and nerves. So just to summarize, these EMF weapons can cause pain equal to anything in a torture chamber. The US Freedom of Information Act request, one such request, revealed that the government was studying optimal pulse parameters for peak nociceptor activation. The key to understanding this is what is a nociceptor. So a nociceptor is a sensory receptor in the body that processes pain stimuli. If it's triggered, no matter what's happening to you in actuality, you will feel pain. So the government was essentially researching how can they cause maximum agony without being detected. Undoubtedly, we found that these innovations in the government find their way into the private sector thanks to defense contractors. Dr. Nancy Galamb of UCSD found that microwave exposure can also cause long-lasting damage. So it's not just the feeling of pain, but it can dysregulate your immune system, damage your nerves and tissue, and cause chronic fatigue. And then very quickly, you might have heard about what happened to US diplomats in Cuba and China. They were attacked with a microwave weapon, and they suffered serious symptoms, including concussion symptoms. Concussion similar to what happens on the football field. This was all done with microwave frequency. This is the darkest slide in the deck. This is really what the presentation is coming to, which is that there is evidence that these weapons are being used by civilians against civilians. In the 18th Judicial District Court of Kansas, there was a business deal that went bad. There was a businessman and a technologist. The businessman and the technologist initially agreed to do business together, and they had a falling out. But the businessman still wanted the technologist's intellectual property, which he would not give. So the businessman then threatened the technologist with jolts of radiation. And it wasn't long after he made that threat that in fact did happen. And the individual felt electronic shocks, popping and ringing in his ears. Essentially, the perpetrator made good on his threat. And the victim, James Walbert, got from the court a first-of-its-kind restraining order against banning the perpetrator from using electronic means to further harass, essentially an EMF restraining order. This weapon's been out for 10 years. I guess you can imagine that there are more incidents than this one example. This was just the most public one we ran across. Summarizing what EMF weapons mean to the rest of us, EMF weapons are the perfect vehicle for the powerful to use against the powerless. The powerful have an agenda, and the powerless try to hold them accountable. But as we've seen in other cases, such as the Harvey Weinstein scandal, the powerful will try to use covert means to punish their victims, to silence people. This weapon fits perfectly in its characteristics into that protocol. There's no laws, it leaves no marks. The perpetrator can essentially attack in a risk-free way today. All of us that came today, we care about society. I don't think we'd come to an ethics and tech forum if we didn't. Some people hear the word ethics and they go the other direction. It sounds boring. But a lot of you are probably involved in one social cause or another. But unfortunately, whistleblowers and activists are the most likely to be targeted. It's my view that they're the most likely to be targeted for the reasons mentioned. People that are essentially trying to hold powerful individuals and corporations accountable, they have this weapon that can essentially accomplish the purpose just outside the perception of the law. There's actually no federal law against EMF weapons, not one. There are 3 states, Maine, Massachusetts, and Michigan, which outlaw these weapons. But having read those bills, I can tell you they won't protect the public from them. The main thing is there's no investigation protocol, meaning what does law enforcement actually do if someone complains of being attacked by this weapon? How can they prove scientifically what is the forensic evidence? Lacking this protocol, there can be no investigation. Without an investigation, there can be no prosecution. I should mention Live Free, the organization I'm a part of, has proposed a bill recommending an investigation protocol right here in California. We've met with state senators and assemblymen, and we've gotten a good response, a good initial response. But there's clearly more work to do. I think, as was clear in Brett's presentation, the defense industry lives in a world of its own. There's no self-accountability. It's up to the citizens to make their voice heard to their representatives. And I'd like to ask you today to contact your representative and put this on their radar. We have gotten good response, but when they hear from their citizens, they take special interest. The organization, our website is thelivefreeproject.org. I encourage you to visit. We have more information. We talk a little more about the military weapons. That's one of a few causes we focus on, but is a key focus of ours. And if you'd like to volunteer, there's the option there on the site. And I'll also be here after the talk, so I'd be glad to speak further if people have questions or would like to get involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Greatly appreciate it. Thanks for the presentation.